Sports presents Benning Bites with Damon Benning. Benning Bites with Damon Benning.
Benning's Bites. Welcome back. Listen, I always ask you guys, gosh, if you grab DB for like 4 or 5 minutes, what would be rapid fire? What would you like to talk about? 98% of the time, I have no clue what I'm talking about. But if I was just going to spitball and roll right there with you fine folks, there's a couple of things on my mind today, this morning, right? So let's imagine I just pulled up. I had to get gas. I'm getting 87 unleaded, right? Just kind of putting that thing in my gas tank, and I'm sitting in my car because I'm not one of those guys that likes to stand out there and hold the pump. So while we're sitting there talking, well, I'm obviously not attending to my gas, you'd say, golly, could you believe what Jim Irsay did for the Colts? That is a nutty owner. Like, what in the world is he doing hiring Jeff Saturday? Whoa. Listen, I don't want to hear about Eric Bieniemy. I don't want to hear about the Rooney Rule. I don't want to do anything like that because, listen, as an African-American male who covers sports religiously, not everything for me is a point of contingency. Sometimes I like to kind of take a step back and see what I can see. I like other perspectives, right? And so sometimes I think a lost art is sometimes we listen just to give a reply as opposed to listening so we can understand. So let me try to understand what Jim Irsay is saying. I listened to him defend the appointment of Jeff Saturday yesterday vehemently. I mean, he was under the gun and experienced. He's not this, he's not that. And listen, Irsay's been around a long time, and his GM has put together a good roster, and I don't believe he believes that this is on the general manager, right? You've had 2 quarterbacks that did not work out in Carson Wentz and maybe potentially Matt Ryan. We'll see what happens because I don't believe that book is fully written. And so he says to himself, gosh, with 8 games to go, I have a veteran coaching staff surrounding him with a couple of other coaches on staff that have been head coaches. What do I need to put my team together? I talk about this all the time. If I'm putting together a team, I want guys that can accentuate my weaknesses. Not accentuate my weaknesses, can complement my weaknesses while magnifying my strengths. If I'm a high-level thinker that lacks tactical awareness and kind of day-to-day, I want a day-to-day guy. If I'm a guy that is too buried in the micro, then I want a macro guy, right? I like balance. So I'm thinking Irsay may be saying to himself, I've got a ton of experience. That's not really what I need. I've got all this money invested in my offensive line. I've got this high-priced running back in Jonathan Taylor. Why aren't we more physical? What happened to our attention to detail in terms of playing well up front? I want a guy that understands how to play up front. The day-to-day management of personalities and things like that, I have guys like that. So let me try to instill some toughness and some no-nonsense. Maybe a guy that once upon a time stood up to Peyton Manning on the sidelines during one of Peyton Manning's famous meltdowns. And Jeff Saturday was one of those guys that could command the respect of Peyton Manning. So instead of being quick to say, it's this, it's that, this isn't this, it could be a couple of 2, 3 things. Because the Rooney Rule may or may not be applicable here, but let's not forget, Irsay's a guy that hired Tony Dungy, and he also hired Jim Caldwell. And last time I checked, those are 2 African-American coaches. So I didn't immediately think that. But what I did think was what I just alluded to. Maybe he understands fit for what his team needs based on the amount of money he has tied up in this year for success and what ails this team. And maybe, just maybe, Jeff Saturday did the rest of the coaching world a favor. Who else would come in on an interim basis on a team that's in flux and risk putting their resume on the line for 8 games as a trial run for a future coach? Yeah, that's not for everybody. press pause. Let the local guy with local ties that has an understanding on how that franchise works and thinks, let him take the proverbial quote-unquote bullet, if you will, and let it be as it may. The other thing, if you get outside the NFL, college football, the playoffs, we saw what happened. I think my partner and I both thought, listen, Georgia will roll, right? Spread's high for a reason. They will own Tennessee. That game was not as close as the score indicated if you watched it. So now the real discussion becomes, there's a couple, 2 or 3 teams hanging around. I'm not ready to get into the 2-loss discussion yet because that may not be a factor, especially if Michigan turns out to be who they can be and Oregon runs the table. Because if Oregon runs the table and they just have the ugly loss to Georgia out there, and Georgia will have hammered everybody en route to playing for an SEC championship, the real discussion could become, what happens between Oregon and Tennessee in the polls? How far does Tennessee drop? And the other thing is, what do you do if you're TCU? Here's TCU. They're not very good looking. They always show up to the parties. Everybody lets them in. And you see that crowd that's kind of whispering in the corner. Oh, see TCU. They're not this and they're not that. Oh, my gosh. They're drinking White Claws. That is so tacky. TCU is not that team. Well, guess what? All TCU does when they get into the party is saying, hey, you may not like me early, but give me time. I'll grow on you. It's kind of like fine wine. Give me a little time. I'll be better. If TCU doesn't get enough help from the rest of kind of an ups and down, topsy-turvy Big 12, I don't know. But they play a round-robin schedule, and a one-loss Big 12 team would be hard for me to think, yep, a 2-loss team someplace else would jump them because they play a legitimate schedule. But I really say all that to say, and I'll get you out of here on this, until the conferences decide we need some uniformity on schedule, the non-con, and number of conference games played, you will always get into the 1-loss versus 2-loss debates. You'd be amazed at how clear the picture would become if everybody played the same amount of non-conference games and the same amount of conference games where you were truly comparing apples to apples. The Big 12 should get the benefit of the doubt, all things considered, because of how the conference schedule breaks down. There's no running, there's no hiding. You play everybody. And that's what happens when the dust settles at the end, where 1-loss Big 12 could be significantly greater than 2-loss anywhere else. I don't know if you like Timbits or croissants or maybe a bowl of cereal, or maybe you're a Nature Valley salty peanut guy or gal, whatever you like for your breakfast bites. Make sure you get some of this too. Wherever you get your information, your podcast, Spotify, Apple, or even get at me on Twitter. Good old-fashioned Twitter. At Damon Benning. I'm there. Don't you miss it. That's Benning's Bites. Stay tuned for tomorrow.